Welcome back to Panhandle Legends, where we take a look at the local figures who helped write the history of the High Plains. I'm Caden, this is King Hill, and this time we're talking about Fray Juan de Padilla and the first Thanksgiving on the High Plains. How's it going, King?
Well, good morning. Thanks for having me once again. I appreciate
Thank you
it.
for coming back. So it is November. We're getting ready for, the holiday season and Thanksgiving on the High Plains. But the first Thanksgiving in the United States that most people know about, the one in Plymouth in around 1621, actually is like the second or third one that happened in the continental United States. I understand now that the first one actually happened on the High Plains. Is that right?
Very much. And this is so interesting because historians have verified it. It happened in 1541 in our own Padilla Canyon.
That's amazing.
And there was Friar Juan Padilla, as you mentioned, who's the subject of this episode. And he was part of the Coronado expedition as Coronado was making his way from Mexico up through this part of the country, went on into Kansas, went on into New Mexico. He stopped in Padilla Canyon. And Juan Padilla, the friar with the expedition, conducted a ceremony, a mass of Thanksgiving to celebrate the fact that they found food, they were helped by the indigenous people there, and they were very grateful to have water, food, shelter in Padilla Canyon, which they considered a miracle, and it was in a way. And so actually the first Thanksgiving service was conducted in our own Padilla Canyon in the year 1541. Now, some historians say it took place in El Paso, but this has been documented. Actually, it was Padilla Canyon. And it's fascinating to think, if you look at history in a linear fashion, that history is truly not really linear, that it's more in a circle, and the first Thanksgiving service was right here.
That's amazing. So for the historical context of this story that I understand, the Coronado expedition at this time in 1541, we said, was in the process of looking for the 7 cities of gold. So moving on from, I think they were in New Mexico at that point in their journey, they were looking for the legendary city of Quivira, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, which was a real place. It was a province of the Wichita people. It wasn't a city made of gold, but it was, a city, a collection of people living in a community there.
One of the reasons they thought it was gold, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, please go ahead.
One of the reasons they thought it was gold because the soil contained mica. Oh. And so when the adobes, like at the Zuni Pueblo, were constructed, it would glint in the sun, and it would shoot off an incredible shine or sheen. And so they thought, this is gold. And it was actually the mineral mica that was part of the soil itself compacted into the adobe walls.
That is so cool. I mean, I would probably think it was gold too if I saw that. Just another thing to add to the beautiful sunrises on the High Plains. So at that point in the Coronado expedition, they learn about Quivira and decide that that's the next city they're going to try and find among the 7 legendary cities of gold. So Coronado takes about 1,500 men from New Mexico, and they start going east, which is kind of novel since most of the expeditions we know of in the United States, like at that point in history, most of the expansion kind of comes westward from the east instead of the other way. So that's kind of an interesting part I noticed about this story. And among that group of 1,500 people were a few priests from the Franciscan order, of which Padilla was one. He was the youngest priest with the Coronado expedition. So what was it like for these guys as they're making their way into the High Plains for the first time? Some of the letters that we have from recollections of the Coronado expedition talk a lot about just the endless kind of disorientingly flat plains that they encountered after leaving New Mexico. So
you can imagine with no landmarks, no big trees, just as you say, the flat surface, it would be like an ocean. So you think of Magellan, you think of Columbus, you think of the people, those explorers on the ocean with no markers other than a sextant and the sun and the moon to guide them. This was pretty much the way it was for the explorers because they had no way. They call it later the staked plains because they would actually drive stakes in the ground.
To have some kind of marker, right?
Precisely. But when they went through, there was nothing. And so it was desolate. It was both hot and very cold. It was incredibly windy, as we know about.
Very windy, just buffalo and grass everywhere.
Dusty, and they actually saw the buffalo and were astounded. But, as far as provisions coming from Mexico, all this great distance, they had to carry whatever provisions they had with them. And most of that was armaments. Most of it was gunpowder or arrows or things for their early weaponry, horseshoeing equipment, that type of thing. And food, as we know, is perishable. So they would eat a little bit and have to scavenge to find new. Water, as we know, is at a premium, was then, is now.
Oh, yeah.
And so you can imagine the duress that these people went through, and they were all questing, of course, for gold and glory, where Padilla was questing for God and how to serve God by introducing the Gospels to the indigenous people. And so it's interesting, you have this band of rugged mercenaries, many of them not from Spain, who are bound to look for the fabled 7 cities of gold and to find gold and to have glory. And that was her driving force. And Padilla was wanting to convert and share the gospel as he knew it with the people. And so it was an interesting dichotomy between the two.
Yeah.
But the soldiers would look to Friar Padilla for comfort, for solace, for inspiration. And so he was very much an instrumental part of the whole expedition.
Absolutely.
And
Literally
then
to keep the people's spirits up, I guess.
Exactly. And so then when Coronado diverged, as you say, he went on with the other soldiers. Well, he left Padilla. Padilla chose to stay. And then later, when Coronado returned to Spain, Padilla chose to stay. And he stayed and he made many converts. And then, through some misunderstanding, history never truly explains, some of the indigenous people became very angry and attacked Padilla and the other priest. But to Padilla's credit, as history tells the story, as they were coming under attack by multitude of angry indigenous people, Padilla told the rest of the people with him, run, get away, go. And his hope was that he could, by showing his solitary presence and faith and courage, stop the attack. And so he knelt down and faced this multitude of onslaught while the others sought safety, and of course he was killed.
Yeah, it's a rather tragic end to the story, but I guess noble in its own way. So Padilla, for extra context, like King was saying, when Coronado's expedition got to Paladuro Canyon, they came to the understanding that they were, going the wrong direction to get to Quivira, which is actually up more in the Kansas-ish area. So they were going southeast. They needed to go northeast.
Exactly.
And Coronado was rather discouraged at that point, and after a while, he started to split up his expedition into different places. Most of the people in that expedition went back to New Spain and stayed there, sort of in the New Mexico-ish area, whereas Padilla and a few of his lay brothers, his clergymen, stayed in the area. Some of the historical records we have of
Kansas
of him, mention that even though he kind of whiffled about in the area for a little while, within the next couple of years after his first visit to Paladuro and then to Quivira, Padilla said that he just couldn't forget the children of the plains. And so he went back to that region, made friends with the people of Quivira, and according to our records, stayed there working as a missionary for a couple of years until he and his group of clergy were attacked. Their group dispersed after that attack happened, in which Padilla was killed, and they made that report a few months after it happened, once they finally reconnected with the Spanish army. And so Padilla, through that way, through how his death was described by his companions, became known as the first martyr of Texas, and possibly even in the continental United States, is my understanding.
That's exactly right. That's what people say, yes. Highly venerated, highly revered.
And so if you've ever seen the monument to Padilla, which used to be in Elwood Park, as King was told me before we started recording, but is now on the grounds of St. Mary's Cathedral here, you can see even in that artistic interpretation, Padilla is commemorated in his kneeling position, praying to God as he's martyred for, doing the thing.
And I would encourage people that are interested to go by St. Mary's campus and see it. It's right there off of Washington, and it's fascinating. It's a fascinating monument. As you say, the etching depicts Padilla's strength, his faith, and his martyrdom.
Yeah. Which is kind of how he's known in modern history. But lesser known part of his story, he is remembered mostly for the martyrdom that he experienced later on in his time in the High Plains. But the lesser known part of that story, as we were talking about earlier, is, again, the first Thanksgiving in the United States. So we kind of mentioned the trek that Coronado's expedition had to go through to get to Paladaro Canyon. We were talking a little earlier about how Coronado's expedition was made up of people from all over the world, and they went through some rather distressing circumstances on their way down into Paladaro Canyon. One of the records that we have of that trek into Paladaro was the first night after the expedition went down the steep canyon walls. They were inundated by a very severe hailstorm, which scattered their horses, damaged a lot of their equipment, and as anybody who's lived on the high plains for a little while will probably know, the weather can get pretty severe, even in the canyon when you're just kind of hanging out down there. But kind of miraculously, there were no severe injuries from the people there reported, and nobody died, nobody got swept away by the river. Which was rather novel and was kind of the reason that Padilla said, hey, here's a novel idea. Let's have a service the day after the storm to give thanks for the fact none of us are dead, and that we have this beautiful canyon full of, running water on the plains and food and
wild game
and bounty. So what do you think is what part of this story, as you were learning about it, surprised you most? Or what's your favorite part of the story, or anything you've learned about Padilla?
I think just the man he was. And again, through this series of Panhandle Legends, we're seeking to honor and celebrate those remarkable individuals, men, women, young, old, who persevered, who rose to the occasion, who were visionaries, who were dreamers, and people who were actively pursuing their dreams, their thought, their calling, if you will, and Padilla is a prime example of that.
I agree. So why do you think this particular first Thanksgiving is maybe lesser known than the one we commonly refer to in Plymouth in the 1600s? Why do you think that one has a little bit more notoriety than the one in the West?
Oh, I think it's typical of many things about history. History is taught by the victors. Our history is taught by the most remembered incidents. Everybody remembers in 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Everybody has the image of the pilgrims with the buckles on their shoes and the buckles on their hat and the bounty of the turkey and the Native Americans contributing corn.
It's rather iconic.
Very iconic, perfect word. And so unless you really delve into history, you don't know these lesser-known stories. And that's what's so interesting and fascinating to me is the lesser-known stories, but just as important, and in some cases more important and can become more iconic. And so the lesser-known stories intrigue me, and the lesser-known people who did remarkable things intrigue me. And that's what I want to bring to the series.
I think that's a great thing to bring to the series. And it's one of the most special things about it, I think, being able to find a local perspective on historical traditions and context that you might not have realized before. Like, oh yeah, we celebrate Thanksgiving every year in the High Plains, pilgrims or whatever, New England shenanigans kind of drifting out into the West. But I think it really does kind of give you an extra perspective to learn about the local original kind of Thanksgiving feasts that we had here, such as they were.
Very much. I spent most of my life here in Amarillo until I went off to New York and other places. But I wanted to come back. And when I came back, it's interesting because, and everyone can say this, whether they live in Washington, whether they live in Vancouver, wherever they live, New Orleans, wherever. But it's such a special place with such a special history. And I think it behooves us, those that are longtime residents as well as newcomers, to learn about our local culture, to learn about our history, and to embrace it, because there are lessons here that are just as important and vivid as they are to Plymouth Rock, in my opinion. One of the people I most admire is Ken Burns, and and I know
Suitably so.
in no way can I compare myself to Ken Burns, but the things that I like about Ken Burns is his investigations, his ability to write, his ability to communicate, his fact finding, his digging and sifting and countless perfect researching to tell those stories and honor those people. And that's the way it is here on the High Plains. And we need to do the same with our stories. And that's why I'm hoping Panhandle Legends will resonate. We're doing, as you know, one a month for a year. That's 12. But hopefully, if the audience likes it, and the teachers like it, and students like it, and the public likes it, there's tons more stories yet to be told.
So many, around every corner. And for the record, I think that the Panhandle Legends project is kind of Burns-esque already in how the segments that I've seen of it so far, and being able to talk with you at length about the subjects that you're covering. But there really is more to find around every corner. So what do you think is maybe the most important takeaway for students from this story of Padilla? You were talking about the value of endurance and being able to follow your dreams. Do you have anything else or anything that you think is most important for people to remember about Padilla when they talk about him?
The story, and that it happened here. And we would know about it were it not for researchers or scholars or archaeologists or ethnologists. And so as a child, my mother was a librarian, so I was steeped in literature, for which I'm very grateful.
That's
and
amazing.
I would encourage parents to tell stories to their children, to read stories to their children, and more importantly, to learn and propagate the stories of where they live right here in Amarillo. And there's so many fascinating stories. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag, but the feature we're doing in December, as you know, is a very important story. It's about Melissa Dora Oliver Eckel, who is a most incredible individual.
She's a fascinating person.
I knew very little about her, and I grew up here. And so these are the kind of stories that I think is so important.
Absolute history makers, or suitably Panhandle legends, as it were. I think that's great. Well, thank you so much for talking with me in depth about Padilla. And speaking of other stories of the Texas Panhandle, including illustrated ones, you can find a few links in the article that you can find beneath this video, where I give a little bit more context about Padilla and Coronado and their expedition, and a few links to books, including illustrated stories of the Texas Panhandle, through the UNT, the portal to Texas history, where you can find a lot of other resources as well. Well, thank you again, King. I really appreciate talking with you, and I'm very excited to talk about Oliver Eckel next month, and I hope you guys will join us yet again. Thank you for tuning in to Panhandle Legends, and we'll see you next time.